Duggars Dethroned, Unraveling Media Intricacies Surrounding the Family's Controversies. The Duggar family, widely recognized for their television series 19 Kids and Counting, had an impressive rise to reality TV fame where viewers were free to gawk at the spectacle of a family of 19 children clad in prairie dresses and denim. Yes, 19 children, all from the same two parents. The family is made up of matriarch Michelle and patriarch Jim Bob, followed by their 19 children: Josh, Jana, John David, Jill, Jessa, Ginger, Joseph, Josiah, Joy Anna, Jedediah, Jeremiah, Jason, James, Justin, Jackson, Johanna, Jennifer, Jordan, and Josie. TLC packaged this family up in a digestible, family-friendly manner, which glazed over their ultra-conservative, traditional, patriarchal, and predatory religious practices that were at the heart of the Duggar lifestyle. Through their rise to fame, the Duggar family was able to rise out of poverty and assert powerful influence within their church, the IBLP, or Institute of Basic Life Principles, headed by the now disgraced Bill Gothard. The Duggar children were homeschooled, using the curriculum created by their ultra-conservative church. The children had extremely limited access to the secular world, only being able to listen to certain music, never watching TV, and having limited and censored interactions with people outside their family. Ironically, though, Duggars still became some of the most popular reality TV stars of the 2010s, earning the title of TLC's most popular show. Their utter rejection of popular culture within their own family is paradoxical when thinking about how pop culture was exactly how they became known and powerful. They shunned and resented media and any forms of critical literacy on behalf of their children, while broadcasting their lives to American audiences at large. After years at the top, the Duggars' good, Christian, honest image all came crashing down. One scandal after the next brought Duggar secrets to light and forced the family to address the secrets and lies they told to fool audiences. This also forced audiences to reevaluate their own critical lens and reckon with the fact that reality TV can actually paint any reality it wants. Just as easily as the Duggars rose to superstardom, the facade broke and revealed the abuse happening just under the surface. The Duggar family and their sphere of influence was like lightning in a bottle. They had the perfect conditions to maintain the illusion of wholesomeness and virtue to the public as they indoctrinated their children, concealed scandals, and protected the criminals amongst them covertly. But these conditions were fleeting, and the same media channels that built them up were also the very thing that took them down. Now for some background on the family. The early days of Jim Bob and Michelle. Michelle became a Christian at the age of 15, and Jim Bob had always grown up religious. Michelle was a cheerleader in high school and notably did not grow up with the same strict modesty standard she'd raised her girls to uphold. The two met because of mutual friends and eventually began going out when Jim Bob's mother was working as the manager of the yogurt shop a young Michelle worked at. They were essentially a typical couple, kissing and touching before marriage, which is something that they both claim to deeply regret. They were married when Michelle was 17 and Jim Bob was 19. After they were married, Michelle used the birth control pill for a time before stopping it to have their first son, Josh. After Josh was born, Michelle went back on birth control, but while using it, she got pregnant and later had a miscarriage. Jim Bob and Michelle both blame the birth control pill for causing this miscarriage, which scientifically is not true. But due to this traumatic experience, the family now swears off using birth control and spread lies about how it can be harmful. Before the show, the family was impoverished, but continued to have children almost every year. They all lived in a 2-bedroom, 1,200 square foot home, which is a far cry from the home we see while they are on the show. They struggled to afford basic necessities like food and clothing, being known for taking advantage of restaurants where children eat free policies are offered, and shopping exclusively at thrift stores. Now, being poor is not a crime, but the issue with the Duggars is their quiverful beliefs, which means they were to have as many children as God would give them. The term quiverful comes from the concept in which an archer would want their quiver, which holds their arrows, full with arrows. This is a typical feature of many Christian religions that reject birth control and, by effect, have lots of children. A more nefarious result of this philosophy is that the children of these large Christian families will go on to have their own large Christian families and therefore grow the membership of their religion for future generations. Now for the Duggars' first media appearances. They first had a special that appeared in 2004 on TLC called 14 Children and Pregnant Again. This showed their lives as a Christian family, a large family, and a family that was adding to it still. This documentary is mostly a fluff piece showing the spectacle of them all. To the average American, they were good, wholesome people who had some quirks, like their prairie dresses and floor-length wardrobe. We also got our first looks at the big house, the house the Duggars began building, but had not completed at the time of filming. This house is what they now occupy today. The special showed the children spending their time working on building the house, talking about how this was a valuable experience and learning for them. TLC, to make for a better show, eventually paid for their home to be completed, which led to their next special, 16 Children and Moving In. The Duggars had a total of 5 specials, including Raising 16 Children, On the Road with 16 Children, and the Duggars' Big Family Album. They essentially followed the same format, following the Duggars in their daily lives, pointing out what makes their family unique. These specials ultimately led to the creation of their reality show, 17 Kids and Counting, when they first truly broke into the mainstream. This show underwent name changes, becoming 18 Kids and Counting, then ultimately 19 Kids and Counting, when the Duggars finally stopped spawning after their 19th daughter Josie was born December 10th, 2009. The series was incredibly successful, with key moments of the show being Michelle Duggar giving birth via C-section to the couple's 19th child, Josie Brooklyn Duggar, on December 10th, 2009, 6 months into her pregnancy. Josie was very premature, only at 1 pound 6 ounces at her time of birth. Show also showed Josh, the eldest Duggar son, marrying his wife Anna in season 2, episode 2. On November 8th, 2011, the Duggar family appeared on NBC's Today Show to announce their 20th child, but on December 8th, 2011, the Duggars announced that Michelle had miscarried 20 weeks into her pregnancy. They held a memorial service for this stillborn baby on the show. Other Duggar children, like Jill and Jessa, were also documented in the series, getting into courtships and eventually marrying these men and having children with them. The series was the most popular that TLC had, averaging 2.3 million viewers per episode in season 10 and scoring in the Nielsen Cable Top 25. But the show was abruptly canceled on July 16, 2015, but more on that later. It's impossible to talk about the Duggars without talking about their fundamentalist Christianity. Besides having 19 children, the other main feature of the Duggars' identity is their faith. The Duggars were loyal members of the IBLP, or Institute of Basic Life Principles. Despite this being presented on the show as wholesome and lovely, the IBLP is wrought with scandal and often accused of being a cult. So now a little brief history of the IBLP. The IBLP was founded by Bill Gothard in 1961. The IBLP teaches its own biblical principles. 1, the principle of design. 2, the principle of authority. 3, the principle of a clear conscience. 4, the principle of ownership. 5, the principle of suffering. 6, the principle of moral purity. 7, the principle of a life calling. Notice this is eerily similar to the 10 Commandments from the actual Bible, but uniquely IBLP, warping Christianity to espouse their own messaging. Bill Gothard also preached 49 character qualities that he expected from his followers. Of these, the 10 unchangeables are your gender, your siblings, your parents, your birth order, the time of history in which you were born, your physical features, your mental capacity, your race, aging, and your day and time of death. In regards to homeschooling and higher education, the IBLP teaches that all parents must homeschool their children under all circumstances. Bill Gothard teaches that formal education is a trap from Satan and that even doctors do not need to go to medical school. The IBLP forbids its followers from listening to virtually any kind of music, including most contemporary Christian music. Anything with a beat is considered satanic. Followers can listen to classical music and hymns. From the IBLP, how the rock beat damages our brain. When we listen to music, our minds try to bring the beat and the melody together. When there is an off beat, the mind struggles to coordinate the two. Neurobiologist of Georgian Court College, Lakewood, New Jersey, and a physicist of Fairleigh Dickinson University in Rutherford, New Jersey, indicated that the devastating effects that occur in animals when there is prolonged listening to a rock rhythm. The brain cells involved actually became deformed as they attempted to reconcile the beat and the melody. These kids were denied any grasp of critical media literacy that empowers people to think and make meaning for themselves. The paper, Critical Media Literacy is Not an Option, explains, critical media literacy aims to expand the notion of literacy to include different forms of media culture, information and communication technologies, and news media, as well as deepen the potential of literacy education to critically analyze relationships between media and audiences, information and power, from Kellner and Scher in 2007. Another requirement for 21st century literacy is providing context for exploring how text positions self and other. Advocates of critical literacies argue that literacy education must address the power relationships perpetuated through and around texts through critical engagement, from Burnett and Merchant in 2015. The Duggars essentially granted their children the exact opposite of this. They were discouraged from critical engagement and were told that biblical texts and the wisdom booklets from the IBLP were the only correct information they needed to memorize and not to question. The IBLP teaches that wives must be totally subservient to their husbands and that they must obey them all time. Likewise, children are taught they must obey their parents unquestioningly. Gothard encouraged IBLP parents to train their children like dogs. Gothard also encouraged corporal punishment and even said that beating should not stop until the children learn to accept them silently. That women and children must always instantly obey their headships and that they will be punished by Satan if they fail to do so, which many followers have reported keeps women and children in a constant state of fear. In addition, IBLP teaches that all marriages must be arranged by fathers of the respective families and that couples must maintain total sexual chastity before marrying. Often, couples cannot even hold hands until they are engaged. Kissing before marriage is forbidden. As a side note, Gothard also believes that he was a God-appointed authority and that IBLP members were commanded by God to follow him. Now, the IBLP preaches that women must be modest at all times. IBLP women must specifically cover their legs, at least to their knee, their arms to their elbow, their entire chest area. They must avoid clingy or sheer fabrics, form-fitting clothes, or any embellishments like buttons or lace, or patterns that could draw attention to risky areas or eye traps. The IBLP also teaches that women are expected to smile to please others. Bill Gothard even goes so far to prescribe the way women can look at other people, stating that eyeing others in a flirtatious manner signals a rebellion against authority. Here we have a little exercise that would be taught to young girls about their attire from the IBLP, asking them to identify which eye traps they see in the outfits in the picture and what they should avoid. These eye traps apparently were, in number 1, see-through lace on shoulders and arms. 2, long necklace and design that draws the eye away from the face. 3, a drop waist that also draws the eye away from the face. 4, slit in the skirt that draws the eye up the leg. 5, a v-neck shirt and drooping bow that draw the eye downwards. 6, patterned stockings that distract from the face and draw attention to the legs, as well as the V-shaped collar. So a little trigger warning here in regards to sexual abuse and rape. The IBLP teaches that a woman or a girl who is sexually assaulted but does not call out is as guilty as her own attacker, meaning speak out. The IBLP also teaches, including it in its homeschooled curriculum, that even an infant female's nakedness can create insatiable desires that will arouse a man around her, even her brothers or fathers, and that these men will molest her as a result. Bill Gothard teaches that men and boys cannot change diapers because it will lead to sexual abuse, and that mothers are at fault when an infant or toddler are molested because mothers are responsible for ensuring their children dress modestly. Female toddlers and children are also blamed for their own sexual assaults, which IBLP teaches as a punishment for disobedience or immodesty. So why should we care about this ministry the Duggars follow? The Duggar family were the stars of the IBLP, and all their children were educated through them alone. Its teachings have affected the current evangelical movement, and Bill Gothard's ideas still inform the Duggar family and those like them. This community was kept intentionally insular, with camps and events taking place for families to network with one another about their beliefs. Jim Bob and Michelle, as they grew into fame, also grew into their influence within the IBLP. The Duggars specifically did not teach their children religious literacy, which entails the ability to discern and analyze the fundamental intersections of religion and social, political, and cultural life through multiple lenses, from Harvard Divinity School in 2023. They taught the one way to be correct in life was led by one man, and everything else was wrong. The Duggars, in keeping with the IBLP, were exclusively homeschooled using their programming. This curriculum, which is made up of wisdom booklets, were all based on the Bible, plus whatever else Bill Gothard had espoused as the truth. In an example of a page from a wisdom booklet, a science question states, "In what ways did God create man to be poor in spirit?" And then cited passages from the Bible as their source material, such as, "Our need for food from a cursed earth. Quote, thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee." Genesis 3:17 through 19. Another one, "Our need for comfort in increased sorrows. I will greatly multiply thy sorrow. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life." Again from Genesis. And lastly, most of all, our need for salvation and daily cleansing by the blood of Christ. See John 3:3. They were indoctrinated since birth, given a pathetic education that taught them only one biblical perspective on the world. They were sheltered from all outside influences and media and offered only one way to look at the world. This way of educating specifically discourages literacy and does not teach your children to be independent thinkers. James Baldwin, in his talk to teachers, shared, "The paradox of education is precisely this. As one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. The purpose of education, finally, is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions." From Baldwin in 1963. These children, due to their insular life, being homeschooled, were also at risk for slipping through the cracks and being unprotected. The lack of contact with educational staff isolates homeschooled children from adults outside their families, churches, and fundamentalist homeschooling circles, leaving them particularly vulnerable to long-term maltreatment. Teachers and other school staff have traditionally been the most common reporters of child abuse and neglect. When a child is being abused or neglected at home, it is the teachers or other school staff who recognizes it and reports it. If the child does not go to school, that extra set of eyes is missing. This is not to say all homeschooling is bad, but it is just a higher risk for children to fall through the cracks. The Duggar family is also notorious for parentification, in which older children are responsible for raising the younger children. They are even proud of it, bragging about their buddy system in which older daughters have teams of younger children that they must educate, raise, and discipline, and also care for. These older children are still children themselves, but now must spend their time raising kids that they did not choose to have. The Duggar family relies on incredibly defined gender roles to keep their home humming. The women in the family, including the youngest girls, clad in skirts and dresses, complete all of the whole household tasks, including cooking, cleaning, and childcare. The male family members are expected to provide financially and complete traditionally masculine tasks like yard work and construction projects. Now, this uber Christian, sheltered, conservative, shameful lifestyle must be as perfect as the Duggars say it is, right? Well, of course not. During their heyday, the Duggars busied themselves by trying to come across as the most pious, righteous family that had it all figured out. Ultimately, they wanted their viewers of the show to be inspired and join their fold. Jim Bob Duggar has spoken many times about how he believes the show gave him a platform to spread the word of God and that the show was his ministry. He rejoices in how many people have reached out to him and made changes in their lives to become more conservative, have more children, etc., etc. For a while, the Duggars were getting everything they wanted: money, fame, influence, and power, till it all began to unravel. On May 21st, 2015, In Touch magazine released a police report containing information about Josh Duggar, the oldest Duggar son's, sexual offenses. According to In Touch, the report has been hidden since 2006 and was just obtained by the magazine through a Freedom of Information Act request. Jim Bob has also refused to allow police to interview Josh when they opened a felony investigation in 2006. The Duggars star on TLC's hit show 19 Kids and Counting. In Touch magazine first broke the news of the Duggars' underage sexual molestation scandal in this week's magazine. This came as a shock to the American public, who watched as Duggar secrets were revealed in real time. The police report detailed incidents that occurred in 2002 when Josh was around 14 years old. According to the report, he was accused of inappropriately touching 5 underage girls, including some of his sisters and a babysitter, while they were asleep. The victims were reportedly unaware of the incidents until Josh confessed to his parents, Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. Jim Bob Duggar chose not to report the incidents to authorities promptly. Instead, he addressed the matter within the family and sought counseling for Josh. The police report was filed in 2006 when the information was anonymously sent to the Oprah Winfrey Show, which subsequently contacted the Department of Human Services. The release of the police report led to the cancellation of 19 Kids and Counting and generated widespread media attention. The Duggar family faced scrutiny for their handling of the situation, particularly their decision to not report the incidents to the authorities when they first learned of them. The Duggars responded to the media frenzy by speaking to Megyn Kelly from Fox News. Jim Bob and Michelle spoke with her, as well as Jessa and Jill. Jill has now reflected about her decision to speak on her traumatic experiences at her brother's hand from years prior, making it known how she felt pressure from her family to save their reputation. She believed that she was being a good daughter and a team player for her whole family during this challenging time. At the time, the girls minimized the past events and tried to communicate that they were okay. Jim Bob is quoted as saying, "The girls, who had been identified as Jill 24 and Jessa 22, have totally forgiven Josh and gone on, and Josh is now a wonderful husband and father. He's a godly man, and it's just like, you know what? Sometimes there's young people that make mistakes. They get involved in alcohol and drugs and different things in their youth, and then they get treatment, and they get therapy, and they go on to become very great people." The Duggars very much hoped that this would put an end to the frenzy and that minimizing the issue and downplaying what actually happened was the best strategy. All of this was in an effort to protect Josh, who had always been seen as their golden child and did his best to present that way to the audience. Josh was a large part of the show, especially as he was shown getting married on the show and having several children with his wife, Anna. Due to his clout from the show, Josh tried his hand at politics and tried to portray himself as a good conservative Christian leader. Josh was notably missing in action from this interview and said nothing after the scandal broke, allowing his sisters and victims to do his bidding. It wasn't over, though. Josh soon was exposed for his involvement in another scandal just a few weeks after TLC formalized the cancellation of 19 Kids and Counting. A data leak revealed Josh Duggar was a paying member of Ashley Madison, the social networking site made to facilitate extramarital affairs. He'd spent almost $1,000 on 2 different accounts between February 2013 and May 2015, including an affair guarantee fee of $250, whatever that means. The Duggar issued a statement in which Josh wrote, "I have been the biggest hypocrite ever. While espousing faith and family values, I have secretly, over the last several years, been viewing pornography on the internet, and this has become a secret addiction, and I became unfaithful to my wife." Josh was now twice exposed for being a con and a criminal. His actions had greatly damaged the Duggars' reputation of being wholesome and pure. This scandal contributed to the pattern of the Duggar family choosing to rally around Josh rather than distance themselves from him and his actions. Their decision to stand by him showed their complicity and further damaged their credibility in the eyes of the American public. Well, at least temporarily. Within the same calendar year, the family was given a spin-off series, Jill and Jessa Counting On. The premise of the show was essentially the same as 19 Kids and Counting, except it just focused more on the adult children and their relationships. Well, except Josh, who was now not allowed on camera, but he was still very much a part of the family. The show began mainly focusing on Jessa and her husband Ben, and Jill and her husband Derek, who had recently begun their own marriages and families. Overall, the show was fairly standard and was essentially the lateral move the Duggars had to take once again to be accepted in the public's good graces and back enjoying their reality TV show fame. It is notable that in the first few seasons, Jim Bob and Michelle's presence was scaled way back when compared to in 19 Kids and Counting. However, with every season, they seemed to be crawling back onto screen. One major change came when Jill left the show after 6 seasons of filming. Jill and Derek starred in 6 seasons of Counting On. She walked away from the reality TV series in 2017 ahead of its season 7 premiere in 2018. This step back can now be seen as the first of many in Jill's breakaway from her family. Through her personal social media and book, Jill has documented herself wearing jeans, getting a nose piercing, drinking alcohol, using birth control, and sending her children to public school. Now, those things literally sound like the most basic, normal things, but to her, they were incredibly rebellious and essentially made her a social pariah in her family. Keep in mind, Josh, the molester and cheater, was readily accepted into their fold. This year, in 2023, Jill and her husband Derek released a book entitled Counting the Cost, which discussed Jill's experiences growing up in her own words. She recounted her trauma and what it felt like to be re-victimized against her wishes when the police report was released. The most salacious details of the book are the financial abuses that Jill and many of the other siblings experienced at the hands of Jim Bob. Jim Bob controlled every cent made from all of the shows, even the one that began with Jill's name. She was not paid for her work on any of the shows, and when she would ask her family about this, they would deflect and try to convince her that what they provided her with materially, things like shelter, food, and clothing, was her payment. Jill also discussed her contractual obligation with the show and how she was essentially tricked into signing a contract without being shown all of it. Her family hid these details from her, along with the finances. Jill's husband Derek was an accountant and also realized that Jill was in trouble with the IRS. Jill and Derek got a tax bill saying they owed money on $130,000 of earnings, money they had never seen. They wrote a letter to Jim Bob asking that they receive the same amount the government claimed they'd earned. After much back and forth, and after Jill and Derek began asking about being compensated over and over again, Jill claims Jim Bob and Michelle sat their older kids down and gave them a one-time offer of $80,000 each to, quote, start their lives. While the rest of her siblings were glad about this, Jill said she and Derek were not, and eventually decided not to sign the paperwork in exchange for the check. Untrusting of her father at this point, she also says Derek and her were convinced that there were some ulterior motives, and that there was probably a lot more money than that to offer. They later discovered that Mad Family Inc., which was the family business and family network, had made roughly $8 million from the show and their endeavors. Jill, who was eventually paid $175,000 by Jim Bob, writes, quote, after all, 13 years as a filming family has taught me that everything has a cost. Plus, Pops' lifestyle alone told us that the show had generated a lot more than the equivalent of $80,000 each, end quote. Jill's book offers insight into the more insidious and personal side of the Duggars' lives and gives her a first-hand account of how difficult it was for her to break free from their sphere of influence and also receive fair compensation. Sadly, it is interesting to think about if this would have ever happened if Jill had been given a better education growing up. If she was taught to know better, have better financial skills, and learn about the basic workings of business, would she have been able to protect herself? It is unfortunate that it seems like it took an outsider from the group, her husband, to finally offer her a different way of doing things, and that her family may not always have all the answers. This all goes back to Jill's ignorance, which is not her fault, but is instead proof that her parents and their strict religion and the sheltered education they provided to their kids succeeded in creating obedient insular drones. The Duggars were also the subject of an expository Amazon original documentary early this year called Shiny Happy People. This documentary unravels the illusion of the Duggars, digging into their more insidious intentions. Their hunger for fame, influence, and power allowed them to soak in all the spoils of reality TV fame. They had a weekly platform that could reach millions, filled with anything they chose to share. Their lives could be neatly tied into 45-minute episodes that cast them in the best light imaginable. They could essentially keep most of their reality off their reality TV show, which Jim Bob viewed as ministry to the masses. They had an agenda, and it was not one of faith and goodness. It was largely selfish and secretive, keeping their skeletons neatly shoved in the proverbial closet. Well, this documentary nicely demonstrates the absolute unraveling of the Duggar facade, primarily focusing on Josh's serious, heinous crimes, as well as the downfall of Bill Gothard from the IBLP. I don't want to just recap this documentary, but I would suggest to anyone interested in the topic to watch it. As it stands, the IBLP is still in existence and followed by many members of the Duggar family, although some adult children have taken care to distance themselves. The founder and leader, Bill Gothard, has been removed from power mainly due to accusations of sexual assault on 30-plus young women. He was never convicted of these crimes, as the case was dismissed because it exceeded the statute of limitations. So just a trigger warning now, this contains some not so great, actually really terrible crimes that Josh committed. I'm not going to go into great detail, but there will be mention of sexual crimes that also involve minors. So I would skip ahead now if that is not a topic you would like to hear about. The most recent and truly horrible news about Josh Duggar was revealed in November 2019 when U.S. Homeland Security agents searched Duggar's used car dealership, Wholesale Motor Cars. Later on April 29, 2021, U.S. Marshals arrested Duggar on federal charges of receiving and possessing child pornography. Prosecutors believed the images were transmitted in May 2019. I'm not going to get into detail about these charges and the crimes in any detail, but know that they were horrible, criminal, and disgusting. I do not believe that this is something that should be thrown around as more tabloid fuel or as casual critique of the Duggars, as it is an incredibly serious and disgusting crime. Just know that on May 25th, 2022, Duggar was sentenced to 12 years and 7 months in prison. His earliest possible release is October 2nd, 2032. This will be followed by 20 years of supervised release, during which he must register as a sex offender and can have no unsupervised contact with minors, including his own children, of which he has 7. The public facingness of this family, the thing they took so much pride in as it gave them power, was the very thing that took them down. People knew their names, and news sites knew people would click. After a firestorm of backlash, the Duggars were still cocky enough and power-hungry enough to launch a spin-off series from the show that was canceled in shame, and has since again been canceled due to even more disgusting, horrible shame. We have the media, television, print, social media, and mass media to thank for the Duggars being known to us all. Compiled here are just a few of the People magazine covers over the years that included stories of the Duggar family. Some of them are positive, others of them very negative. Either way, the Duggar family was getting press. In our undiscerning culture of media today, there is a possibility that a family like the Duggars will be catapulted to fame seemingly overnight. This brings them riches, fame, and power without any consideration if this is something they should be trusted with. Quote, when the information that spreads is helpful and true, free-flowing channels can be crucial. When the information is destructive and false, free-flowing channels can trigger a public health crisis. From Phillips and Milner, 2021. In the case of the Duggars, we can now look back and say they probably should have never been allowed to have the fame they were granted. They are not wholesome, pious, or good, like the family they tried to come across as. In fact, many of the things they promote are abusive, dangerous, and alarming. However, it took everything reaching such a boiling point and severely crossing the line and the law for them to receive true criticism and consequences. This is not to say, though, that there was never any dissent about the Duggars. Since they became popular, many platforms and modalities have discussed the family, their controversies, and the ways in which they were dangerous. An early platform we see of this was Free Ginger, named after one of the Duggar daughters who early viewers hoped would become the rebel child due to some of her antics. Here, quote, hate watchers could discuss with each other what they thought about the show and the culture that was being promoted. This was one of the earliest cases of, quote, fundy snark that then expanded with Reddit being a major home for people who felt similarly about the Duggars as well as other famous fundies. The subreddit r/fundy snark uncensored reports on the scandals and developments surrounding the Duggar family and other media famous conservative evangelical Christians. It is also a community for people who were once a part of these extreme religious groups. It is a place where they can discuss their own experiences and deconstruct their religious indoctrination. 2 YouTube channels that create content around these topics today are Fundy Fridays and Without a Crystal Ball. Fundy Fridays, made by Jen and her husband James, creates in-depth, long-form, research-based videos, usually doing a deep dive into a specific topic or person. Without a Crystal Ball typically focuses on shorter videos, which are updates about the daily current events happening in the lives of these Fundy families. My point here is that there are individuals who are making use of media and the platforms they have to actively critique the Duggars and their mainstream influence. After enough attention and noise around them, and scandal after scandal, the Duggars were dethroned from the reality TV reign. These platforms offer a different perspective that can actually make change and expose the truth. In conclusion, their Duggars and their rise to fame was captured by TLC for the American public to gawk at or be inspired by, or even just to observe with morbid curiosity. TLC did not care what people thought of them and the spectacle, as long as it meant that the viewers kept tuning in with each episode. They filmed their, quote, pious lifestyles until they could not keep up the charade any longer. The thing is, this unattainable perfection they tried to achieve was probably most responsible for their downfall. If they did not teach their kids to constantly feel so ashamed, guilty, and wrong for their natural feelings, they probably would have avoided many issues. And here it's important to note, I'm not talking about Josh and his disgusting criminal behavior. He's an outlier. The Duggars created a culture of shame and fear for their children, where their kids were expected to convince the world about their wholesome godliness. They indoctrinated their children in an extreme, closed-minded religion that only taught them one perspective on things. Now their children are under-equipped for the real world by design. They were taught to be uncritical, conformist drones that were sweet and obedient. They were sheltered from the outside world and any other ways of thinking about being. Unfortunately, this has tied many of the adult children to their families forever, afraid that if they deviate at all, they will face the same fate as Jill, who is now an outcast. The Duggar family is a cautionary tale of what happens when the wrong people are given influence by the media, and how other people, like their own children, who are under-equipped to think critically and evaluate things, will become the victims of more evil dealings. The Duggar parents leveraged media fame and power for themselves as they left their own children clueless and ignorant about the spotlight they were being thrust into. This family and their controversies are inextricably linked to the media sources that gave them their fame to begin with. Their stories stand as a cautionary tale about the influence of media and the potential harm that can befall those who lack the tools to critically navigate such frame. The family's legacy is a stark reminder of the responsibilities that come with media influence and the impact it can have on individuals ill-prepared to handle the consequences. And here are my sources for this deep dive into the Duggars. I hope you enjoyed listening and learned a thing or two about the dangers of religious indoctrination under an intense media spotlight. Thank you.